"Those medals are fake," Mark laughed, holding my silver star between two fingers like it was a cheap souvenir. "Come on, Claire, nobody believes you were some kind of war hero." The table erupted with laughter. My husband, Daniel, looked down at his drink and said nothing. That hurt more than the joke. I reached for the medal box, but Mark pulled it away and grinned. Maybe she bought this stuff online. Then a chair scraped across the room. An older man at a nearby table stood so suddenly that conversation stopped around him. His eyes weren't on Mark. They were locked on the call sign engraved inside my medal case. "Raven," he asked quietly. For the first time that night, Mark stopped laughing. "My name is Claire Mitchell. I was 39 years old that night, a retired Army intelligence officer who had spent nearly 14 years in uniform. Most people hear that and imagine confidence. What they don't see is how easy it becomes to disappear after service. The deployments end, the briefings stop, the calls stop coming, and eventually, people begin treating your past like an old story they no longer need to hear. I never needed applause for what I had done. But I did expect basic respect, especially from my husband. Daniel and I had been married for 6 years. He wasn't a bad man. That's what made everything harder. Bad people are easy to leave. Good people who keep disappointing you are much more complicated. Over the years, Daniel had developed an uncomfortable habit whenever my military background came up. He would change the subject, make a joke, downplay it, anything to keep the attention away from me. At first, I thought he was simply private. Later, I realized something else. My service made him uncomfortable, not because I talked about it, because I didn't. The less I said, the more people seemed curious, and the more curious they became, the more withdrawn Daniel became. His best friend Mark was worse. Mark lived for attention. He was loud in restaurants, loud at parties, loud in conversations that had nothing to do with him. If a room had a spotlight, Mark believed it belonged to him. That night's dinner was supposed to be a celebration of his recent promotion. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man who desperately wanted recognition was about to mock someone who had spent years avoiding it. Earlier that afternoon, I had attended a memorial service for a soldier I once served with. That was why the medal box was with me. Inside were a few decorations, some old dog tags, and a folded letter I hadn't opened in years. Daniel saw me place the box in my purse before we left. "Please don't make tonight about the Army," he had said while grabbing his car keys. The words still echoed in my mind. I hadn't planned to talk about the Army, but for some reason, Daniel always acted as if my existence alone was enough to embarrass him. And now, across the table, Mark was holding my silver star in front of an audience, while my husband sat silently beside me. Then the older man, who had recognized the name Raven, began walking toward our table. The older man stopped beside our table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Mark still held my medal between his fingers, but the confidence in his smile had begun to fade. The man looked to be in his late 60s. Straight posture, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that didn't need volume to command attention. He wasn't looking at Mark. He was looking at the engraving inside my medal case. "Where did you get that name?" he asked. Mark laughed nervously. "You mean Raven," he said. "It's probably some fantasy nickname she gave herself." A few people chuckled, not as many as before. The older man's expression didn't change. I recognized the look immediately. Military? The room hadn't noticed it yet. I had. Mark leaned back in his chair and pointed toward me. "Claire likes letting people think she was some secret hero." "Mark," Daniel muttered. "No, come on." Mark continued. You know what I mean. Everybody knows how these stories get bigger over time. Then he held up my silver star again. Maybe next she'll tell us she saved the world. A woman across the table laughed. Another guest looked uncomfortable. I remained silent, not because I was afraid, because experience had taught me something valuable. People reveal themselves when you stop interrupting them. Mark mistook silence for surrender, just like many people had before him. The older man finally turned toward me. Captain Claire Mitchell, he asked quietly. The table froze. Daniel's head snapped up. Mark blinked. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. Yes, I answered. The older man nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. Then his gaze dropped to the dog tags resting inside the open metal box. One of them carried an old operations identifier that almost nobody outside a specific circle would recognize. His jaw tightened. For the first time all evening, I saw genuine concern on someone's face. Mark noticed it too. Trying to recover, he laughed again. Wait, don't tell me you're actually buying this. The older man slowly removed his glasses. The movement was small, but suddenly, nobody seemed interested in their food anymore. A fork stopped halfway to someone's mouth. The conversations at nearby tables faded. The older man looked directly at Mark. Then he spoke 5 words that drained the color from my husband's face. That is not a joke. The room stayed silent. Mark opened his mouth as if he wanted to make another joke, but for once, he couldn't seem to find the words. The older man extended his hand toward me. Colonel Robert Hayes, retired. I stood and shook it. His grip was firm, respectful, not performative, the kind of handshake that carried history behind it. When he released my hand, he looked around the table. Captain Claire Mitchell, he said. It's an honor to finally meet you. A champagne glass froze halfway to someone's lips. Daniel stared at me. Mark stared at the colonel. Neither of them looked like they understood what was happening. I think you've got the wrong person, Mark said, with an uneasy laugh. Colonel Hayes ignored him. Instead, he looked at me. You were attached to the Kandahar Logistics Corridor operation in 2012, weren't you? I nodded slowly. The memory hit me immediately. A desert operations center. Maps spread across folding tables. Radio traffic filling the air. A convoy trapped between 2 unsafe routes. 1 decision, 1 signature, 1 chance to get it right. I remembered staring at satellite images for nearly an hour while men in the field waited for instructions. If I chose the wrong route, people would die. If I delayed too long, people would die. So I made the call. The convoy changed course. 17 service members came home. One of my closest friends did not. That was the reason I rarely talked about the mission. The success belonged to the survivors. The grief belonged to me. Colonel Hayes seemed to understand that without me saying a word. I read the after-action report, he said quietly. The room listened. Every person, every chair, every breath. I've taught that operation at leadership seminars for years. Mark's smile disappeared completely. Daniel looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. I could almost see the moment he realized how little he truly knew about the woman sitting beside him every day. But that's impossible, Mark said. No, Colonel Hayes replied. What's impossible is mocking someone when you don't know what they carried home. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody even looked at Mark. The audience he had relied on all night was gone. Then the colonel turned toward him. His voice remained calm, which somehow made it more powerful. And then he said the sentence that changed everything. Your brother came home because of her. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Mark stared at Colonel Hayes as if waiting for someone to laugh and rescue him. Nobody did. That's ridiculous, he finally said. My brother never mentioned her. The colonel folded his arms. Your brother wouldn't have known her name. Mark frowned. What does that even mean? It means, Colonel Hayes said, that the people making life or death decisions aren't always the people standing in front of cameras. The room grew even quieter. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning overhead. A waiter stopped walking. A woman at the next table lowered her wine glass. Nobody wanted to miss what came next. Colonel Hayes looked toward me. Then he looked back at Mark. Your brother served in Bravo Company during that operation. Mark's face lost color. My brother was in Bravo. I know, Hayes replied. I met him 2 years later. The colonel paused. He spoke about Raven more than once. Daniel looked at me, slowly, carefully, as if he were seeing me for the first time. He said Raven made a decision that brought his team home. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Mark opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Then Colonel Hayes delivered the final piece. He spent years trying to find the woman behind that call sign. A fork slipped from someone's hand and clattered softly onto a plate. Nobody even looked toward the sound. Every eye remained fixed on our table. But that's impossible, Mark whispered. The colonel shook his head. No. Then he pointed toward the metal box. What's impossible is sitting across from the person who helped save your brother's life and mocking her for entertainment. The words landed like a hammer. For the first time all night, Mark had nowhere to hide. Then Daniel spoke. His voice was barely audible. I knew about the letter. I turned toward him. The room did too. Daniel swallowed hard. I found it years ago in her files. A painful silence followed. You found what Mark asked, the thank you letter from your brother. I felt my chest tighten. I had wondered for years where that letter had gone. Daniel lowered his eyes. I never told anyone about it. I nodded slowly, not angry, just disappointed. Then I finally spoke, calmly. You thought being loud made you right. Nobody looked at me now. They looked at them. And for the first time that night, the truth owned the room. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. The laughter was gone. The confidence was gone. Even the restaurant seemed quieter than before. Mark looked down at the table. For the first time since I had met him, he wasn't searching for another joke. He wasn't performing. He was simply embarrassed. I'm sorry, Claire. The words came out rough, uncomfortable, real. I didn't know. I studied him for a moment, and I believed him. Mark's problem had never been hatred. It had been arrogance. He had spent years assuming he understood everyone in the room. That night, he learned he didn't. I know, I said. The relief on his face was immediate, but I wasn't finished. Not knowing was the mistake. What you did after that was the choice. Mark lowered his head. There was nothing to argue with. A few minutes later, he quietly handed my metal box back to me. This time, he held it carefully, like it mattered, because now he understood that it did. Then I turned toward Daniel. That conversation was harder, because the deepest wounds rarely come from strangers. They come from people who should have stood beside you. Daniel's eyes were red. I was wrong, he said. I know. I'm sorry, I nodded, but I didn't smile. The apology mattered. It just wasn't enough. You should have said one sentence. He looked confused. What sentence? I held his gaze. Any sentence. The pain on his face told me he finally understood. This was never about Mark. Mark had only been the loudest person in the room. Daniel had been the most important, and when it mattered, he had chosen silence. For years, he had treated my service like an uncomfortable chapter he hoped people would skip, not because he hated it, because it reminded him of how small he felt beside it. Colonel Hayes quietly placed the metal box into my hands. You never needed to prove who you are, Captain. I smiled for the first time that evening. No, I said. I think I finally understand that. When I left the restaurant, Daniel followed me outside. But for once, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't defending my past. I wasn't shrinking to make someone else comfortable. The truth had already done its work. And sometimes, dignity isn't about winning the room. It's about knowing your worth, even before the room catches up. Sometimes, the most important lesson in life is that your worth does not depend on who recognizes it. People may misunderstand you, overlook your sacrifices, or even laugh at things they do not understand. But dignity comes from knowing who you are, even when nobody else does. Respect earned through character lasts far longer than attention gained through noise. If this story touched you, tell us in the comments which moment stayed with you the most. Have you ever been underestimated or judged unfairly? We'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoy stories about honor, strength, resilience, and quiet justice, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.